All right. So the next thing I want to talk about with you guys is argument appeals. Okay. So fourth century BC, long time ago, Socrates said these are the three building blocks of an argument. They are ethos, pathos, and logos. And if that sounds like a long time ago, I mean, think about it. Arguments have been around as long as there's been at least two people on this earth, right? Everyone is not going to agree on everything. So a long time ago, this famous philosopher said these are the three main building blocks of any argument. You need to have ethos, pathos, and logos. And that means ethos means credibility, pathos means emotion, and logos means logic. Don't worry too much about these terms, but that's where they are. And these are the kind of three main things that every argument needs to have. What those really mean is that as a reader or someone watching somebody give a speech, you got to ask these three questions. Did the person giving the speech or the writer seem credible or believable? That they seem like they know what they were talking about, that they have clues in their writing and speech that led me to believe that they have good information. They're someone I can trust. The next one is, did the speaker or writer appeal to your emotions and make you feel connected to them, right? Did you feel closer to them, that you knew something more about them afterwards, that they make you feel outraged, that you wanted to change something, that they make you feel so sad about something that you wanted to change something, that they make you feel so happy about something that you said, yeah, I want to do that because that made me feel good. Any of those things, right? And it could just be connectedness. Maybe you just felt a little bit closer to them because of the speech and the information in it, and the way they delivered it. And the last one is logos. Did the speaker appeal to your rational or factual side? Did they give you some information to back up what they're saying that sounded factional to you or made sense, had some sort of verification behind it to say, yeah, that could be true, or that argument makes sense, right? The one thing I want to note is in all nonfiction, the first thing a writer or speaker is trying to do is be credible or believable, right? Because if nonfiction is about telling the truth and you don't find the person credible or believable or seem to know what they're talking about, what's the point of reading what they wrote or listening to what they say? So that's baseline. Like all writers or speakers are trying to do that first and foremost, all right? Now, this might sound like a lot to kind of juggle, and maybe these terms are a little bit confusing, but folks, guess what? We've already worked on these two first ones, ethos and pathos, a lot, whether you know it or not. So remember, ethos is kind of the main thing all writers are always working on in nonfiction, right? And then we've worked on pathos when we told those stories about ourselves, that narrative in the first unit, that last unit we just finished, right? The purpose of a story is to get you to feel more connected to somebody, right? To get them to feel something. Anytime someone shares a story with you about their lives, you get to know them a little better, so you'll feel a little bit closer to them. And usually you start to think about things that you have in common with that person, and you also feel closer to them, right? So we've already done this. And the things that make narrative even more, make you feel closer to somebody when you have them and have that emotional support is those details, that imagery, that figurative language, the emotional language are the things that are gonna really make your narrative have some sort of an emotional appeal on your audience. Now, I've added jargon here, and the reason why that word might be new to you. Jargon just means language that is specific to hobby or subject or discipline. So the jargon right now in English is ethos, pathos, logos, right? That's specific to English class when we're talking about argument. In your life, if you're in band, jargon might be cadence or 4/4 time signature. If you're in a sport like basketball, your jargon might be crossover or pivot or box out, right? If you're in skateboarding, it might be an ollie. Okay, sorry, I don't know a lot about skateboarding. But these words that are just very specific to a subject matter. And so those also helped build ethos when you're telling a story. So if you're telling a story about marching band, tell us about the cadence or the time signature or the instrument you're playing and what's specific about it. Because those details make you seem more credible. They show that you're an expert in that and you know what you're talking about. So that's ethos and pathos. It's something we've already worked on. A lot of arguments only need ethos and pathos with them. A lot of people can be really convincing about that, but not all. Depending on your argument, depending on your subject matter, what you want to talk about, And depending on your audience, right? Because some people straight out the bat don't want to hear what you got to say about anything. Depending on those things, you might need to have more than just a really good story. And that's where the next thing comes in, which is logos. We'll get there in a minute. So even in the story we just read, or the article we just read, our writer gives us an anecdote about him, about his relationship with Mexican food and how it's always been important to him, right? It's part of his childhood memories. I even like this detail about how his mom or his parents smuggled cheese wheels out of their ancestral villages. I think it was smart to add that these weren't just taken, they were stolen, snuck out, because it's like, oh, we know a little dirty secret about him, right? And so that also makes us feel closer to him. When someone tells you a secret, you feel closer to them. And so he's establishing some ethos here, some credibility. Like, I know about this because I've researched it deeply, but I also know about this because this is my whole life. And he definitely has some pathos here by telling us the story about his mom cooking for him every morning and every dinner, no matter how hard her job was. And then this nice little detail about the smuggled cheese, right? So that's a good example of how an anecdote or a narrative story of your life is going to help convince your audience, even in the piece we just read. Okay, so like I was saying, some arguments just need ethos and pathos. And in the last unit, that was enough, right? But in this unit, we're saying you need more than that. You can't just tell a convincing story from your life to make yourself sound credible. You're also going to need to have some logos or some other information that backs up what you're saying. So primarily, this is definitions, facts, quotes, historical events, statistics, and now jargon kind of comes over here, right? The jargon about what you researched, the language specific to the item you researched is going to help you sound more credible, and you're probably going to do some research maybe to get that information, because you won't know the jargon in some of these things. But the pathos is still there, right? Even when you're talking about your historical events, even if you're when you're defining a term or you're giving us some quotes, you still want to have your vivid language in there, your imagery, your figurative language, your emotional language when you can, because a writer's first weapon or a speaker's first weapon is their words, right? So the words we choose matter. So we're going to focus on adding these pieces on the left, that logos, in this next piece. And we're going to see how the writer did it in a minute, but we can't forget about that word choice and how it can also have a really an emotional effect on the reader, and how that the word choice that you have is also going to build your credibility. Because when you're choosing your words carefully, they can tell that you're an expert. Okay, so this is the opening from the reading we just did, and it has almost all the appeals that we mentioned earlier, right? So he tells us, we have a fact that the astronauts were 213 miles up in space, right? This is about the astronauts cooking Mexican food using tortillas in space. So we have this first fact, right? And then we have some jargon very specific to flying, the STS-128 NASA. And we have some other examples of jargon in here. Let's see, we have the research station, the ammonia tank, right? Some things that are very specific to being in space that makes him sound more credible for using that language. He didn't just say spaceship, right? He gave us a very specific one. He mentions the ammonia tanks, so we can picture that a little bit more and really see how what they're doing up there. So that jargon matters. We have a date, right? We have a quote, right? Espero I'm going to say this wrong, cosecha de mi sueño servir como inspiración a todos, right? He has a quote there. So he's doing a lot of the things we saw on the last page, all that logos in here, right? Historical event, the jargon, the quote, the facts with the space. All of these things are coming together in one paragraph, and you can see that he definitely researched how widespread tacos and tortillas are. How more widespread can they be than being in outer space, off this planet where they were created, right? Not even in the region, outside of the region where they were created, but in another area. And then to my point earlier about still including that language that makes you feel something, that very last sentence there, the flour tortilla sealed in a vacuum pack, chunks of ready-to-eat scrambled eggs, and fat sausage patties. Man, that just gets me hungry. I can taste it in my mouth. I'm getting a little bit happy thinking about that food that I love. So he's being convincing by using that too. So, the other thing I want to mention is, like, writers don't just use ethos, pathos, and logos in isolation, right? They're doing all these things together, if not all the time, most of the time. It's very rare that you'll just say, oh, that's logos by itself, or, oh, that's pathos by itself. It's usually a combination of these things that's happening in any given paragraph or even sentence. All right, so that's what I noticed in our reading. I hope that helps you guys kind of think about some of the things you want to incorporate in your writing. Any of these moves, the definition, the facts, the quotes, historical events, and statistics. But don't forget about the other great things we learned earlier: the details, the vivid language, the imagery, the figurative language, the emotional language, and the narrative, the power of the narrative. If you can fit your own story in here too, it's going to be all that more convincing.